Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alpine Intel's The Savvy Adjuster podcast, where we discuss the property loss topics important to adjusters with the experts who know them best. I'm your host, Senior Account Manager Chris Nichols. Now, some of you may be familiar with us already, but for those of you who are brand new, Alpine Intel's unique expertise across a broad range of property insurance intelligence really allows us to help our customers reach peak performance throughout the policy lifecycle. This is done through all of our operating brands: HVACI, Strike Check, National Fire Experts, Donan Engineering, the Component Testing Laboratory, and of course, VRC Investigations. And our team of expertise, or experienced professionals, I should say, provide really high quality solutions nationwide. Providing solutions for adjusters means communicating our process and findings effectively, so adjusters can not only use what they know from their carrier investigation, but also take our answers provided to reach an accurate settlement. Today, we're going to get into the topic of parallel investigations with a couple of guests who can share their insights, particularly how they work in fire investigations. Now, just a quick disclaimer before we get started, we're going to be talking today in general investigation and insurance terms. Each property failure obviously is unique, like a snowflake, which is why it's so important to get an assessment to make sure you have the facts for your claims. Here with me today is Senior National Fire Experts Account Executive Kathleen Riley and NFE's Fire Operations Manager John Hill. Thanks to the both of you for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, Kathleen, let's start with you. My understanding, you came to Alpine Intel with a pretty extensive background in insurance. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about that, your experience in the insurance background, and really with fire investigations while in your previous roles.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. So I am a certified fraud examiner and a licensed adjuster. I have 11 and a half years of experience adjusting and investigating insurance claims. That includes large loss fire. In that role, of course, I collected and reviewed statements, documents, reports, other information, completed on-site inspections in the field, and then, of course, hired fire investigators to conduct the necessary origin and cause fire investigations.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. And John, fans of the podcast may recognize you from your appearance on our vehicle fire investigation episode. But if they missed that episode, and shame on them, would you mind talking briefly about your fire investigation career as well?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So I come to National Fire Experts with a background in firefighting. I was a firefighter for about 11 years. Spent about 3 years with a subrogation company doing insurance subrogation work. So I was calling fire vendors like Donan National Fire Experts and hiring fire investigators, reviewing fire investigation reports, negotiating settlements on subrogation claims. And then I've been with National Fire Experts for 15 years now and started in the field doing fire investigations. And now I'm the field operations manager.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like we are in very good hands today. And Kathleen, let's start with you because of your insurance background. We can start from the insurance side of things. Now, how much of an adjuster's initial investigation takes place on site versus, say, gathering information and coordinating from, say, their home office?
Sure. So today, a lot of adjusters are utilizing outside field resources to conduct their on-site investigation needed. So a lot of the adjuster's work is completed from the office. Usually the adjuster will review an insured's loss history and policy history, gather and analyze the claim facts reported by the insured and other involved parties. They'll order and review applicable fire department or police department reports and review the findings provided by the fire investigator that they assign to conduct the fire origin and cause investigation for their claim. Of course, through the investigation, they may determine that further investigation is necessary or additional documentation needs to be sought or information because there may be some additional research that needs to be conducted to clarify some information.
And so what I think you touched on a little bit, but what kind of information is important, say, for the adjuster to know and really gather before they partner with an assessment partner to go out to a claim site? What kind of greatest hits should they be providing to their assessment partner prior to them going out?
Sure. So the adjuster should always obtain a statement from the insured. It's part of, fact finding for the claim. They want to make sure that they find out what happened with the loss, as well as find out what any other witnesses or involved parties have to say. Take those statements. Sometimes the adjuster can't reach a particular witness or an involved party, maybe a neighbor, and they can give that information to the fire investigator and ask the fire investigator if they can obtain that statement. Sometimes when the fire investigator is on site, they can speak with the neighbor and obtain that information, and it can significantly impact that claim. They also should confirm whether any items have been removed or moved from their original location at the time that the fire occurred. That's going to be critical, and they really should know what those items are, where they were located, and communicate that to the fire investigator. I have found in my experience working with contents that it's extremely beneficial for the adjuster to obtain information about items that the insured is reporting as high value or large items in the home, find out where they would be located, and then communicate with the fire investigator to find out if they're able to locate evidence at the scene that either corroborates or if it contradicts what's been reported. That's always extremely helpful. Sometimes you have a fire that occurred, it's a legitimate fire, no issues with it being any sort of incendiary situation, but there's issues on the content side and what's being reported.
Gotcha. And John, anything to add to what Kathleen just got done, kind of recapping as far as information important for adjusters to know before an assessment partner goes out to a claim site?
Absolutely, yeah. So one big thing, of course, is evidence preservation, and when it comes to evidence, we all like to consider the entire fire scene as evidence. So the sooner you can start gathering that information, the sooner you can get a fire investigator involved, the better preserved your evidence is going to be. And of course, memories are, witness statements are sort of flawed inherently in that memories are only as good as the time frame that you give someone to understand what's going on, see and understand what's happening with the fire. The longer you let that go, the longer the more times they sleep, the more that story tends to change. Maybe not even intentionally, it's just part of the way our memory operates. So gathering that information from the insured and any witnesses, getting the fire investigator involved soon, and then that investigator can start getting some boots on the ground, interviewing all of the neighbors, interviewing the public entity, fire personnel, your firefighters, your first responders, fire investigators, things like that, because they're going to also be gathering those statements. They're going to have some good information for you as well. So one big key is getting there quickly, starting on the claim quickly, and gathering those witness statements as quickly as you can.
And I'm assuming there's no such thing as too little information or oversharing, correct? The more the better. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the scientific method means you gather all the information you can. It doesn't mean that all the information is necessarily going to be important to the investigation, but you really don't know what's important until you get a look at the scene. The investigator starts what they're doing with regard to investigating the origin and cause of the fire, and then determining what information may be pertinent to both the claims handler and the fire investigator.
Sure. So we'll stay with you, John. So Kathleen had touched on a bunch of really great information that the adjuster, should gather prior to even looking for an assessment partner. But let's flash forward, and once you at National Fire Experts receive the assignment, I know you have some tasks to do before you personally go on site. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that all entails?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing we're going to do is put a call into the adjuster. We're going to, confirm the scope. What is it exactly that you're looking for? Typically, that scope is going to be determine the origin and cause of the fire. We're also going to briefly touch on anything that the adjuster. And this is the possibilities are endless, right? So whatever information the adjuster would like to convey to the investigator, we typically try to steer away from any sort of preconceived notion or any idea about what might have caused the fire before we get to the scene. Again, that's part of you're going to hear me say scientific method over and over again. That's because there's a set way that we need to proceed with our investigations. There's a very it's very structured, and it's important for that structure to be solid, to have a good fire investigation that can hold up in court, right? So typically we're going to avoid any talk or claims about what may have caused the fire, but any sort of supporting information, witness statements, anything pertinent that's going on with the house. If there were allegations of maybe a storm in the area, we're gonna be looking into researching the weather history. We're gonna do lots of background information on the property before we ever go to the scene, just so we know what we're looking at, to understand what tools or resources we might need at that particular loss. And then the next step is to call the insured or any other contact to get us onto the property, right? So the investigation really starts during that initial phone call. As soon as that person that you're calling picks up the phone, when you start asking questions, how do they react? Do they seem surprised that you're calling? Do they not seem surprised that you're calling? Do they try to avoid taking your phone call? None of those things necessarily mean that anything is that there's an issue necessarily, or that's not necessarily a red flag. But again, we're in the data collection phase. If you look at the scene and there's something strange that you find, maybe there's a correlation to the things that were happening during that phone call. So we're just collecting all the information we can, and then determining how that works into the origin and cause investigation. Is it important, right?
Sure. So data collection, scientific method, all part of the 11-step process. Can you dive in a little bit more about some of the other steps of that 11? I know you mentioned an 11-step process. Can you go into a little bit more detail on some other steps that we take as a fire investigator?
Sure. Yeah. So we're going to be contacting the first responders. Of course, we're going to try to get a copy of that incident report if we can, if one exists. And sometimes we can't get those folks on the phone, but we're going to try. We're going to try every time. And that's going to tell us a lot about a timeline, right? So when did 911 get the phone call? When did the first responder, the very first boots on the ground with the fire department, when did that happen? Because they're always radioing in, hey, I'm on scene, I see this, I see that, I'm doing my initial safety walk around, right? So you're going to have firemen who, as soon as they jump out of the truck, they're going to do what they call a scene size up. So they're going to walk around. They're going to see if there are any safety issues or any life safety issues for either the fire department or for occupants or whoever might be there. They're just going to try to figure out what's happening in that moment and relay it back on the radio. Now, the reason that's important is that can tell us a lot about where maybe the first flames were seen. That can give us some ideas about the origin and cause of the fire. Whether there's anything visible at all. Maybe there's no smoke, no flame visible, and maybe the timeline can tell us a little bit about why that might be, right? So the longer we're there, the more we observe those fire patterns, the more people we talk to, the more we start to take this 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and start putting it together to try to paint a picture about what happened.
Sure, sounds good. So you mentioned when the fire department initially gets there, they are going to look for safety concerns and do kind of their general check to make sure that the site is safe. But then as far as once you as the fire investigator is on site, what are you specifically looking for?
Sure. Yeah. So we're going to start by doing an exterior, almost sort of like the scene size up, right? So we're going to jump out. We're going to start on the outside. We're going to look for any safety issues, but we're also looking for any evidence that might be present on the outside of the building. We're observing where the fire may have breached a window, whether a door was kicked in, what type of demographic you're in. I mean, are there neighbors that could see the property who might be able to give you a witness statement about what they saw? Is it a secluded place? Is there an indication that the place hasn't had power for a very long time, right? So we're going to be making those phone calls to the utility companies, things like that, to see if there were any utility interruptions. We're going to be documenting the scene. We're going to a big one is a neighborhood canvas, right? So we just want to talk to everyone that might know anything about that fire. Especially in today's world, everybody has a cell phone in their pocket. So we're going to be trying to determine whether someone took any photographs or video. That can all prove really important to both the investigation and to the claim, potentially, depending on things that are said or what might be captured in those pictures or videos. We're going to process the scene, and processing can mean all sorts of things, but generally we're talking about observing those fire patterns, trying to understand how the fire behaved, where the fire originated versus where it moved to. And we've got a lot of fire damage. Did it start here or did it start over there? We're going to look at those fire effects and fire patterns to try to understand that a little better. Once we do that, we're going to be excavating the debris. It's really important to remove that debris, insulation, drywall, things like that, all very normal items that you're going to find in a fire scene. We need to start to remove those to uncover any evidence that might be there. We're going to reconstruct the fire scene. And the reason that's important is it's going to give you an idea about what items may have been in the area where the fire started at the time of the fire, or what maybe is now missing, or what was never there at all, right? So that's all part of that scientific process where we're eliminating things that couldn't possibly have caused the fire and considering those items that may have contributed to the fire. Once that's done, we're going to determine what evidence might be important to retain, excuse me, if any. We're going to be putting a phone call into that adjuster and saying, hey, this is what you've got, right? This is where the fire started. This is these are our working hypotheses or our conclusions about what the cause of the fire is. What direction are you going to take with this? This is the evidence I see that I think we should preserve. And in some cases, the client says, you know what, based on the circumstances of the fire, the policy, the claim, and what you're telling me, we're just going to close this out. I don't want you to retain any evidence. You'll shut it down. And we can do that. Or if there's subrogation potential or something that the adjuster wants to explore even further, we can preserve that scene, preserve the evidence in place, or retain it and take it with us, and maybe even come back for what they call a joint study with other parties. So it can go in a number of directions, but we're going to maintain communication with the adjuster through that whole process so that they can, they're holding the reins, right? So they're going to help steer us in whatever direction they're going to take the claim, and that will give us an idea about how to handle the investigation.
So you used a phrase, but I think is ringing wildly accurate, which is it's like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, right? Which you must be very good at, I'm assuming. I'm only assuming, but yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of parts and pieces to kind of put together to make, well, like a jigsaw puzzle, a complete picture at the end, right, for the adjuster. And it sounds like a lot of our episodes, this is a similar vein that runs through them, communication, right? And it sounds like, especially in something like this, it's a key aspect of these parallel investigations. So I appreciate you sharing kind of what you and your steps are when you get to the scene. So after that's all said and done, Kathleen, we'll kind of jump back to you. Can you tell us a little bit more and give a little insight into the back and forth that takes place throughout the claim with the adjuster, say after the initial inspection is done? We get that data, we bring it back to the office, and then what happens?
Sure. So it's based on what the fire investigator's findings are at the time is going to determine the next course of action for the adjuster. Are there any red flags that need to be further explored? Is there any sign of it being an incendiary fire? Is there any subrogation potential? So if there's subrogation potential and there's evidence that needs to be collected, then of course the adjuster is going to need to communicate with the fire investigator to determine how they're going to go about collecting that evidence and getting it tested and pursuing that avenue. If it's something that is potentially fraud related, then that's going to need to be further investigated. Depending on the company, the adjuster may handle that initial investigation and then tie in an SIU adjuster and have that looked into even further. Various things can be collected, such as, there may be a financial history that needs to be looked at. There may be a witness statement that the fire investigator obtained on site that contradicts what was initially reported. And that, along with the evidence, shows that the fire actually occurred different from what the insured was reporting. So there are a number of things that can happen depending on what those findings are and how much involvement the fire investigator is going to have after that initial on-site. And to John's point too, there may be a need for a joint study, which means that the adjuster is going to need to send out the fire investigator again and coordinate with any other involved parties. So there's a lot there.
And as far as the final report, let's talk about that, because I think sometimes a big I wouldn't call it an issue, but just sometimes fire reports historically have came back as undetermined, right? We don't really know. But can you speak a little bit to, your frame of reference with National Fire Experts, our report, and what our report looks like, and kind of, what we provide as far as probable causes of loss, things like that?
Sure. So there are a number of reasons why a fire can come back as undetermined. It doesn't mean necessarily that the cause of the fire cannot be determined. It just means that there may be additional steps that need to be taken for us to come to that conclusion. So in National Fire Experts report, we have an actions table that provides you with what the fire investigator believes is the most probable cause of the fire based on what they have examined on site. But then they also list in there what other potential causes of the fire there are. It also includes the next steps necessary to further explore those causes and to narrow it down. We can't definitively say that we can absolutely determine the cause of the fire if we take those next steps, but at least it gives the adjuster the ability to know what direction they need to go in if they would like to further explore that. And then they can evaluate, based on the loss and what what amount of money they want to spend on the claim if they want to pursue those options.
And John, I'll hop back to you. You mentioned, bringing evidence away from a scene to, say, a laboratory. Can you speak a little bit to that process? Because I know that DONA, National Fire Experts, Component Testing Laboratory, Loss Logistics, they all work together as one kind of cohesive unit. Can you speak a little bit to, say, X item making it from a fire investigation site to, say, our component testing laboratories?
Sure, yeah. So once the evidence that we want to retain is identified, we work with Loss Logistics to transport that evidence. That we have folks all over the country who are prepared to come with a truck, trailer, van, whatever it takes, depending on the type of evidence that we're collecting, and transport that back to our laboratory. The reason that's important is because the evidence never leaves our hands. So with some couriers, let's say a UPS, FedEx, mail, even trucking companies, right? So those are oftentimes going to be entities that are outside of forensic engineering companies company itself, right? So you're handing your evidence over to a group of folks who may or may not have any training in handling evidence or maintaining the chain of custody, which both things are very important to the integrity of a fire investigation and the ability to pursue it in court, right? So in our case, we do have a crew who can maintain that chain of custody, get the evidence where it needs to go safely to get it into storage, and then once it gets to our storage unit or our storage facility, rather, we have a fully stocked lab with engineers available who can take it from there, or hold that joint study with the fire investigator and multiple other parties, engineers, whatever we need. We've got all those resources there, all the tools available to disassemble evidence, to X-ray evidence, come to a real conclusion about what the cause of the fire was. Now, I want to be something kind of clear about the dynamics, and because we've talked a little bit about the direction that the insurance company wants to go, right? So I think it's important when you talk about parallel investigations, when you talk about public sector investigators, private sector investigators, and the insurance claim representative, there's no vested interest on the part of the investigator, on the part of National Fire Experts, with who gets paid on the insurance claim, whether anything gets denied, anything like that. What we're mainly talking about is just communication, right? So the investigation can only go as far as the adjuster being willing to make that investment, and they have to make those decisions about how much of an investment they want to make based on the likelihood of what they deem to be successful, whatever that means, whether it be covering a claim or paying a claim, I'm sorry, or pursuing subrogation or defending a subrogation claim. Those are all decisions for the claim rep. And if money were no object, the fire investigator, we in the field we always work every fire investigation in the same way. That goes back to the scientific method. But if money were no object, we would collect the evidence, run the X-rays, and do all that other stuff to get to the conclusion, right? So that's where that communication comes into play. The fire investigator is always going to do the same thing every time, and it's up to the claims rep to sort of pull the plug if they see it's going in the wrong direction for whatever they need.
Sure. Well, long story short, it's nice that they have the option through Alpine Intel to take those next steps if need be. And it sounds like a benefit of using all of those services, getting it back to the laboratory, is a lack of fingerprints on the virtual fingerprints or literal fingerprints, right? That chain of custody. And really, you hear this a lot in the industry, spoliation of evidence. With fire, I understand it is very important to get any sort of evidence back as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and if you have the wrong person handling that evidence, if something gets dropped, lost, damaged, even disassembled in some way, it's fire is destructive in its nature, right? And the longer a fire is able to burn, the more destructive it becomes, and the more destroyed your evidence becomes. And it is not uncommon at all, especially with appliances or electronics, to have those things start to fall apart. So you really need somebody who understands how to preserve that evidence, collect it, and transport it so that it doesn't sustain any additional damage than what the fire's already done. And so evidence integrity is huge to a successful subrogation claim or fire investigation in general.
Sure. Well, it sounds like it. Kathleen, I'm going to flip back to you, and I meant to ask this previously, but I know National Fire Experts offers something called a Matterport scan. Would you be able to kind of dive into that just a little bit and tell the listeners kind of what a Matterport scan is, what the benefits are of that?
Sure. So the Matterport scan is an excellent tool that each of our fire investigators has. We are able to give the adjuster a view inside of the property, inside of the scene where the fire occurred. So, a lot of the environment today is virtual for adjusters. A lot of adjusters are at the desk. We don't have a lot of field adjusters anymore. There's a lot of people handling fire claims that are working from the office. So they don't get that opportunity to go on site and to walk the scene. The Matterport allows us to capture images that are tied together into like a three-dimensional walkthrough of the property. So kind of like what you see with real estate properties when you're touring them online. It's the same kind of the same thing, that where you can go into the fire scene and you can walk through it and kind of see where everything is at. I know, again, in looking at contents and the condition of the property, the layout of the property, all of that information can be gathered from Matterport. You can also take measurements within Matterport, which helps you when you're trying to create your estimates in Xactimate. You may have the ability to actually import that Matterport into Xactimate and create your estimate for repairs from that. So there are a lot of benefits to using the Matterport imaging, and not all companies out there have access to Matterport, or each of their fire investigators having access to it. Sometimes they have to share it. It's not always available, but each of our fire investigators has one of those.
Well, it sounds like it's also handy for content verification. Somebody could say they have a nice 80-inch TV hanging on the living room wall, but it's a tube TV with just a coaxial input from the 90s that was in the corner that they watched their Monday Night Football on. So I'm assuming that kind of helps with evidence confirmation, if you will, or
Yeah, so that further helps as well. If you have a lot of contents, or there's you want to take a look inside of a room for the quantity of contents an insured is reporting, yes, you can speak to the fire investigator and have that conversation with them. When they're on site, they can give you that information. But I think it doesn't beat being able to see it for yourself, right? And to have that evidence that you can refer back to show this is the room, this is the scene. You're getting a much better image when you're able to actually walk through that room and see the layout and piece everything together, versus getting individual photos and having to go through those and kind of sort them together yourself and figure out where everything is at. So I know when I did large loss contents, that was a tool that I always used. It's one of the things I absolutely loved.
Well, it's nice that we offer that through National Fire Experts for sure. So we've covered a lot of information, steps you need to take prior to getting an investigation partner out to a site, and then as an investigation partner, what you do while on site. But I always like to end a lot of these episodes with like real world examples, right? It's fun to talk about the processes, but it's also fun to hear some stories as well. So I will open it up to the both of you. Don't fight. We'll have enough time. But can you either of you give us an example of a kind of a real case study of a parallel investigation that you've done in the past that our listeners may find interesting?
Sure, I can get started. So one especially comes to mind, and we've been talking about private fire investigation and the insurance claim representative's investigation, and those being parallel. But there's another component to that as well, which is the public officials investigation. So you kind of have three independent investigations going on all at the same time. One that I had was it was a situation in Georgia where the story was that the person had gone to Disney World. They had everything was fine when they left. That's always a story, right? Everything was fine. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing different happening that day. That's always a good question, by the way. What was different that day? Sometimes that gives you a clue about what may have contributed to the fire. But in that case, the story was that everything was fine. All of my appliances and all my furniture and all my contents were there before I left. I got a call that there was a fire. I came back and somebody had, since the fire, stolen everything in there, refrigerator, all the appliances, things like that. So the public investigator had indicated that the fire was just too severe for them to be able to do much with it to prove that there was criminal involvement. During my initial scene size up and looking at the fire patterns, talking with some of the neighbors, doing that neighborhood canvas we talked about, and the initial interview with the insured, I started to raise an eyebrow. I wasn't getting a lot of the same stories when I would talk to the different parties. Took some samples. We even had the canine brought in. I had worked at the time. I had a gentleman in the private sector who had an accelerant detection canine. Brought him in. The canine did alert, and we took some samples. We were able to identify some gasoline in the scene. But when it comes to the contents that we were talking about, I was able to take a look at the fire patterns and the receptacles in the kitchen, a couple other places, and say to myself, these things were gone before the fire even happened. So that was a case where the public, private, and public investigator, private investigator, and insurance claim representative all got different stories. Once the investigation was complete, we shared all those stories and were able to identify how glaring those differences were. So I'm not sure how ultimately how that worked out, whether they were able to deny the claim or not. And again, that's really beyond our scope, but I think that's a pretty good example.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to have all the contents removed and then the fire happens. That's a pretty efficient I don't know, moving company, I guess. So and I need to talk to my dog as well, because he is wildly underachieving. If other dogs out there can determine accelerants,
That's right.
He really just kind of sleeps all day. So that's a topic for a conversation later I'll have with him after the podcast. But Kathleen, how about yourself? Any unique investigations you've been a part of that you can share with our listeners?
So similar to what John is talking about, I had a claim where we had a fire reported, and it was a fairly new policy. It was about, I think, for 60 days is what the policy was. And there were some suspicious circumstances. Just again, they weren't home, had gone out, and the fire occurred, and they have pets. The pets weren't home. Again, strange. They said nobody witnessed the fire. What we were able to find out in going out to the property, based on the contents that were reported by the insured, there was some question as to the items that were reported, such as larger TVs that were reported than what was being found on the scene. We were able to locate some brand tags on items that didn't correspond to what the insured was reporting. They had some pretty high-end items that they were claiming, and the items that were in the property did not match at all. Well, we also found out when through a neighborhood canvas and speaking to some of the neighbors that they had witnessed a moving truck at the property about 2 days before the fire occurred. And so they saw items being loaded up in the truck and moved away from the property. And then there were some items that were brought to the property. So what we found out through the course of the investigation and taking statements and getting information on the moving company that they rented the trucks from and the people that were involved is that these particular individuals who were insured removed their contents, put it into storage, moved used items that they had bought at like Goodwill and other places into the property, and then the fire occurred. So, and that that was an intent to get not only the money for the property, but also inflate the claim with the content. So
That's very interesting. The only example I can think of, and it's a dated movie reference, but Indiana Jones replacing the idol with a bag of sand, right? Yeah. So, and to John's point, again, the 1,000-piece puzzle. I mean, it sounds like, with all the information you gather, witnesses, videos, like you said, they're in good hands with national fire experts, putting those 1,000 pieces together to create a big picture, if you will. But truly, thank you to the both of you again for being here and giving us some tips and insights into fire claims and parallel investigations. And of course, thank you to our listeners. You can always check out our show notes. We have additional resources in there, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also visit alpineintel.com's resource library. Ton of stuff there, including additional fire-related materials. And of course, last but not least, if you have property claims that need assessments, you can submit an assignment on our website, or get more details on how our suite of services can bring you the answers you need to feel confident about your settlement decisions. Thank you again for everybody for joining us today, and we will see you next time.